have a habit when something occurs and we don't like the look of it, we create a new term for it. So it's like wrapping it up with a package in a nice little bow. And I think that's exactly what you were saying when we call it human trafficking, and instead of what it is, slavery. Couple of statistical facts that human trafficking generates over $32 billion annually. It's only second to drugs. A reminder that you can use drugs only once, but you can sell a woman over and over and over again. The 3 top states in the United States with the biggest human trafficking issues are California, Texas, and Florida. People like to know statistics here and there, so I'll try to give you a few. But in listening to these women and the perspectives that they have already begun to share has got me thinking about the word empowerment, empower. And how do we empower women who have been sexually exploited, tramped down, beaten, so that they can become the person that God has meant them to be? When I first started getting involved in human trafficking, a hard lesson for me to learn was that I couldn't fix it. And it was not necessarily my problem to fix. That I had learned the importance of empowerment and giving the tools and the opportunities to women so that they can empower themselves. So I'd like to now open it up a little bit more to talk about how do we as a society, as an individual, as a church, whatever, how can we begin to lift these women up and begin to make changes in how we view women and African American women, whoever they may be. I'll start. I think close to me, Adrienne.
Well, I spent a year looking at marriage in the Black African American community and all that it is, and began to recognize a system that got embedded as this looks like power. And so when the slave owner, plantation owner leaves his wife and children and walks into the slave quarters and takes whichever female he wants today, you might begin to interpret that as power. And if the men who are watching it of brown skin begin to think that's what power looks like, how many can I have? How often can I have them? Have whoever's at home be the home, but I can, if you want something long enough and live in it long enough, you might begin to think that that's what's right, that's what's powerful. And we were talking a little bit earlier about being in this really interesting time when we're seeing people access the Holy Spirit and feeling themselves attached to God and being empowered by this gorgeous, pure thing. At the same time, fighting the status quo of this is how we're going to define power. We need more and more men and women to say this. Having one, staying with one, respecting that one, lifting that one up, that's power. And I believe we're in an amazing time when there are enough models of what manhood looks like and womanhood looks like that we can have a wave of change. Now, there might be some things that are helping that out. Getting sick with a viral disease you can't fix because you go get a pill might be helpful. But what I would love is a stronger piece is a decision that my culture looks like this. Strength looks like this. Women, teaching women you can have better. And telling it from the moment they're born. You are gorgeous, you are beautiful, you are strong, you are amazing, you can do it all. They need to be told, children need to be told, female children in particular, need to be told from the day they can breathe their first breath that they are beautiful and brilliant, creative and powerful. They need to hear that from the first day they can breathe that first breath. And then it matters how we talk about our children who are male. I've raised men, I've raised women, and I say it that way on purpose. From the beginning, I want that young man to know he's more than just whether or not he's got muscles. And so they were told that they were brilliant and handsome, and that I expected much from them. And the first thing they got to learn is part of their life, particularly as men of color, is to respect women and to expect that they are more than their curves, amen? And so I think we have to decide what kind of culture we want to lift up. What kind of culture do we want to raise? And I don't think that's just something that's in the cultures of color. I'm Black, African American. I don't think it's just something that's in my culture. I think it's something we need to be teaching as this is a human life way of looking how we're going to be and who we're going to raise. And that you have a voice and you have a right to use it in all of its tones and its ranges. But we have to be willing to name what the truth is so we can fix where our illnesses are.
Amen. Amen. I think the question of power for me, I ask myself a lot too about how to use my power as a clinician, as a social worker, as a young person, a white person, an educated person, to make choices about how I'm checking myself, not creating, not imposing meaning, not taking away choice, not taking away power really. This is very subtle stuff. It happens every second of every day. But I think power relationships are very fluid. And so for me, the question of power personally and how to create these relationships of support that they're genuinely empowering is a question of really listening before speaking. Not pathologizing, I think, is another one that often goes unchecked. Like the power of clinicians to diagnose can be really used in ways that aren't empowering. And I'm lucky that at my agency we don't use a diagnostic system. The power of language, like even, for example, calling somebody a human trafficking victim versus whatever they define themselves as. Like all these subtle ways that power dynamics can shut down another person's healing. So, and then recognizing the moments of personal power and agency that are already active and emerging, like things that might not look like power, but even making a decision to call you instead of, call an ex-boyfriend or something, like deciding to move in a direction. It can be very, very subtle, but when I see that little spark of like agency or self-determination, I just jump right in the service of that, and I try to let that flow, because I think that's the work of God too, coming through in that very, very subtle way. So for me, that's a question I ask myself too, is how can me in relationship serve the other person, and that's part of how I look at that question.
So I'm going to keep going back for me to land where we need to land today. when we talk about an issue of power and how power is perceived, especially for women of African descent in the African diaspora, we have to talk about racism. And racism is an issue of power and control. So for women of African descent to have power is to disrupt institutions that are set up for them to not have a voice and not have a power. Because that's what racism is. That's what it's done. That's what white supremacy, white mindset institutions have done, that we are standing on, that have set it up for the women that I'm sitting here wanting to raise their voices, for women of African descent of the world to not have any power. So as you said, it's like we are born to have to do internal work because we are already set up that as soon as we walk out of our homes, we are disempowered. Our voices are silenced. We are not seen in a humanistic way, nor then, nor today. When you speak about women of color, black women, African descendant women getting killed and missing, it is not put in a human light. It is put as something that is the norm, that should happen to us, and not something that should be disrupted, nor then, nor now. And it doesn't have to be a woman getting trafficked as we speak, but it's Stacey Abrams standing up and speaking from a political place. It's Maxine Waters standing and speaking from a political place and being disempowered by a system that doesn't think that they should be even standing there speaking their truth. So for women of African descent to be empowered and feel empowered, it's our internal work that we have to do first. Because we move in a world and in a society that does not see us as having anything to say, making any changes, making any movement. And that gets trickled down into how our young girls see themselves. Can they be scientists? Can they be mathematicians? They're told no. And it has nothing to do, it starts with a no based on who they are racially, ethnically, and culturally. And then if they can get past that, view of them, then we can have another conversation. But they're not told that they should be the next Maxine Waters, the next Ayanna Pressley, the next Stacey Abrams. So they're already moving with a level of disempowerment that even within their own internal power, and I can say that for myself. I go into spaces, people don't assume that I have a couple of degrees. It already gets minimized and downplayed because we're supposed to look a certain way, show up a certain way for those to believe that we have the extensive training that I sit here with. So for a woman of color to answer the question about power, it's about who has it, who's been given it, and who doesn't receive it, and how we disrupt it to gain it for ourselves.
Okay, I want to move it to the college campus a little bit. Reverend Adrian has been a chaplain on college campuses for many years. Currently, she is at UMass Boston. Tell me what you see out there. What's going on?
You have the amazing layers of gorgeousness because you've got that first generation young girl whose family has rooted for them, and sometimes the family that didn't root for them, but all of the other human angels sent to affect them stepped in and said, we see promise in you. We're going to help you figure out how to fill out the forms. We're going to help you how to figure out how to get to campus. And you're going to keep coming back to us because your family doesn't get it straight, they don't understand. But we got it, and we see the promise in you. So you see the gamut from the family who, you know, I was at Salem State, and they did kind of Afrocentric, multicultural graduation for undergrad and for graduates. And so you saw some of the families who came, who are shouting for this young lady who's walking across that stage for their first phase of graduation. They all showed up. There are 20 people there on a non-graduation day in the middle of the week who come to shout for that student who's female, got some culture of distance of not just European, and they are supporting her to the hilt. And then you've got the student who has barely gotten by, who can tell you all the horror stories of having the mother and father who didn't get it together, who ended up in the foster care system, who is barely getting by, who has figured out some things and they are making it work. But the dangers and the pressures that exist for them to fail are tremendous. Housing insecurity, not having enough food, got enough funds together and grants to pay for the class and maybe some of the books, but the rest of it is swinging in the balance. Trying to work full-time, part-time. The offers on Craigslist and Facebook that aren't true. The dangers that exist that you said yes because you thought you were going to make some money and get that last book. But the dangers that exist in that are overwhelming. Now, college campuses aren't completely safe. They're not completely safe from your classmates, female or male. And I want to put in this the story of the young man who got jumped and raped. Names and campus left off the list because where I know it happened isn't the only place it happened. So we've got to recognize the dangers that exist for those young women and those young men who don't have enough backing to do what they need to do to make the next chapter more gorgeous. And we've got to recognize that even within the systems of colleges, you've seen enough reports, I've seen enough of students showing up in my little 8x8 office where the system did not work the way it's supposed to work when they lifted their head and said, I got it. There's not enough of the system working the way it should work, that every student is safe, that every student has what they need, that they're going to start that college career and complete it without trauma and step into the next career. Kudos and absolute high five to the folks, the staff people, the faculty who will call me or come find me or send the email and say, my student needs this. I've gotten them this resource and I've gotten that resource, but they need to come see you. Will you hear them? And then to the chaplains and the ministers and the lay people of faith who are willing to sit in their offices and hear the horror story, and I say, don't flinch, don't run. Doesn't mean you won't tear up, but they need people who won't flinch and won't run, and will find them the rest of the stuff they can find them so they can finish the journey of college and have the next thing they need in order to be successful. And worrying about when they come that first day, and they come the second and third day, and then they disappear for 2 months. And it's the weird thing of, technically you're not supposed to chase them. You're not supposed to be, as I said to a young man who finally showed up after a month of being missing, I just wanted to haunt you. He said, you could have haunted me. I said, yeah, but technically, you know, there's this fine line between they're doing okay, woohoo, they've survived whatever that trauma was, and they're in class, yes, and the baby didn't come. It's a weird balance. But we want to act like, well, they got the college, everything's going to be gorgeous and beautiful, and not everybody who's in the classroom with you is gorgeous and beautiful in their soul. There's some ugliness in some of those souls, and they don't mind sharing their ugliness with somebody else. And so we as institutions of higher learning, but we've got to be ready and willing when they show up, wherever they show up, to help them heal so they can meet the promise God has for them.
I want to give a different perspective on the college campus, because I also do work at UMass and on other college campuses. First, we have to understand that the institution was set up. Once again, I'm sitting here from a woman of color perspective, a black woman perspective, for us to not be there. So right now there's a case at Yale that a few young women of African descent, black women, brought against some of the fraternities in the schools. And we don't look at the fraternities and the behaviors of the fraternities as an issue of trafficking or prostitution or abuse. But these girls were going to a party, and this is a direct story because one of the young women is the daughter of one of my sister's colleagues, and they get sexualized at these parties, and these institutions give these fraternities carte blanche to do a whole lot of stuff. So when folks come and charge them with some of these accusations, it's so historical that the schools don't know how to deal with it or don't really address it directly. But these young women have started a case against this fraternity to bring attention to it, because, you know, when you go into these spaces, they're thinking they're going to a party. They say no. These spaces are set up for these men to think that they are in control of the bodies of every woman that walks through those doors. So in the college campuses, we have to address how these fraternities are perceived and the behaviors that come out of some of these fraternities and how women are sexualized within that context. Also, you know, I'm a clinician, but I also call myself a recovering clinician because I don't think the profession addresses what is already a given for women of color, which is post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, that we already move with as soon as we are born and knowledgeable of who we are in the world. So if that is not being acknowledged, then you're not really seeing where then you need to go with whatever diagnosis you may want to place on her. But every woman that is walking with a level of pigmentation on the darker pew is going to be already dealing with a level of depression and trauma for what it means to be that. So then to go into institutions that do not set themselves up for them to be there becomes a whole nother level of something. So there's that. And also, we're sitting in a church, and this might be a bit controversial to say, but to not assume that people only meet and heal their souls through this institution. Because this institution historically has also been a part of modern day slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. You have Georgetown University now in a case where students have brought a case of reparations against the school because it came out last year that the school was able to stand because of the Jesuits selling 272 slaves to hold the school together. So institutions like church also play a role in the trafficking. So the healing also needs to happen with the role of church in the conversation. and how church is perceived in that conversation, and how church heals its relationship with community, specifically communities of color, with black communities, because of the role it played in the slave trade, which, you know, I was born and raised Catholic, the Pope is addressing, you know, because it needs to be discussed, because the healing also has to happen there. So in saying that, and in knowing that, is to also know if you have that young woman or young man that has that information and is living with that information, and you sit in church, is to know how you are going to address that, and also that their healing and their groundedness may be spiritual and not church-based and not religious-based. So all of that needs to come in to the conversation as we have it, because not everyone believes in therapy. As someone who's a therapist but comes from a community from Panama, that you don't take your stuff outside. You leave it at church, or you on the college campuses. Is that is not an institution. Those are not spaces that they feel safe in. And ask them, where do they find prayer? How do they pray? Who do they pray to? That may not be who you pray to. And that's okay, you know. So all of that has to come in to the conversation, which makes it very complex. It's not so open-ended. There's not one answer. There's not a right or wrong answer. Every individual is different, but we who sit with those who come to us need to know all these facets of someone's truth and someone's reality, to then give them the direction and the tools to continue. Because for many, when I did domestic violence work for many years at Children's Hospital, or even with Matahari, we automatically assume that when folks come to us that they're ready to leave their situations or get out of their situations, and that's not necessarily the case. For many of the women that come, it's their beginning of having the conversation to think about what they want to do and what they will do. When women of African descent, Latina women, come into spaces for support, they don't only have to say, when I leave, I'm going to go here to the shelter and I'm going to get this. They have to think what they're losing. Even though they're leaving from an abusive situation, they lose a lot more by going into shelter. Because, for instance, working in Casamigna, if someone came to an emergency shelter, you have to leave your home, the kids have to leave their schools, you have to leave their job. And for women of color, black and brown women, regaining and regrouping all of those things that they lost, even though they need to get out of that violent situation, regaining their footing after that is way more difficult. Finding housing again, getting a good school system for their kids, where's the transportation is going to be, how are they going to get around, all of that comes into play. When women of color, black and brown, Latina women speak on campuses around these issues, campuses that are predominantly don't carry administration that looks like them, that understands their truth, they have to think about all of that before they have to put their case forward, the accusations. These young women from Yale know that they're in an institution that doesn't predominantly look like them. So, and knowing that fraternities are seen as these untouchable spaces, how dare they do this? How dare they call out the system? So all of this, I think, plays into the institutions that are there, how they're set up, what they were built on, the messages that they've continued to carry, and what happens when you disrupt it.
Danielle, I want you to have one more opportunity to speak, and then we're going to wind it up. But I know you work with a lot of women. Can you share a little bit about maybe the the MO of the type of women that you meet and deal with in their situations and what brings them in to trafficking?
Oh, sure. Like the general trends that we've noticed, and well, we've named a lot of it here. But the way the field would, I would say, think about it is that there's vulnerabilities, and that could be from a number of factors. There's a market. There's people who demand bodies that are available, in our case, for sex and labor as well. So there's a market, which is normalized in our culture. It's normalized, it's built off the backs of people who aren't seen as people or seen as commodities. So there's vulnerabilities, there's a market, and then there's business. That's what it is. It's a way, it's a greed. It's profit generating to take somebody who's vulnerable and put them into a market where they're exploited. So that's kind of the way the MO works, the way we think about it. And that's why one of our approaches is to buffer and shore up those vulnerabilities, and that a lot of times getting them into safe housing or jobs, any kind of real support that helps them in a variety of number of ways. I'm sure you have a very good sense of that as well. So that's kind of the MO